Welcome back to the Secular Homeschool Revolution podcast. I am your host, Ashley. This podcast is for BIPOC progressive secular homeschoolers and allies. You are welcome in the space. We just ask that you listen with an open heart and an open mind. So thank you all for being here. It is January. And if you're listening to this episode right now, there is a really good chance you're one of the many parents who just pulled their kids from school and you decided to homeschool. You had enough or whatever transitions happened, and this is where you landed with homeschooling. So before anything else, I want to say this clearly. Welcome. I don't want to offer you good luck because I know you can succeed. I don't want to tell you you should have planned better because I was a homeschooling parent who didn't plan on homeschooling and my backup was against the wall. So I'm not going to tell you because sometimes we just got to do what we have to do. And no, this isn't a phase. I'm not going to dismiss your process that way. I just want to say welcome. January is one of the biggest transition months in homeschooling because you have the holidays, then you have mid-year burnout, and then, if you're in a testing state, and then the schedule's off, and you just realize like things just aren't working the way they should for your kids. So a lot of people make the shift. And here in Texas, I feel like the layers are extra thick because, and it's not just Texas, but similar states where we have the politics and the book banning and libraries closing down. It's just a lot. So one of the first questions I know I get with people who are new to homeschooling or thinking about homeschooling or just jumped in heads first, right, is about science. And is there a difference between a secular science and a non-secular science? And how does that compare with public schools? And I was recently asked this question, and it was in the midst of a lot of things, but I don't think I articulated myself well. And I think I leaned on really like two things. And I want to be able to elaborate because I'm like, oh, if it has creationism or like the young earth theory, ugh. But I need to be able to explain it better. So that's what I've spent my time over the last week, was researching a better way to communicate what a secular science is, a non-secular science, and how that compares, how it compares to like a Texas, specifically because I'm in Texas, public schools. So today, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to slow down the conversation and I'm going to explain it to the best of my ability. Before we start defining what secular science is, we have to name something that doesn't get set out loud enough, especially in education, and I know for a fact in homeschooling spaces. Science does not feel the same for BIPOC families as it does for white families. And that's not about my own personal opinion. It's about history. So a lot of homeschooling conversations talk about science like it can be neutral and it can be objective and it can be separate from the real world. And I don't think that science exists in its own bubble. It's not untouched by politics. It's not untouched by power. And it's most definitely not untouched by harm. So for our community, science has never just been this apolitical thing. Science has been used to justify who deserves care and who doesn't, who is human and who was considered an other. They've used science to see what was studied and what was meant to be protected, or who benefited, or who was sacrificed. And we carry throughout our families the memory of medical experimentation on Black bodies. There's a reason why the Black community is one of the lowest attending to that go to get their medical care. There's a distrust. Indigenous kids were used as science experiments in residential schools. And then we had forced sterilization of Black, Indigenous, and Latino women. And then we have the environmental policies and issues. We have, like now, where are the data centers being built? Where are the landfills? Where are the refineries? What's happening in the toxic waste? And whose neighborhoods are getting the toxic waste, right? And some people like to call it a coincidence, which is neglectful, not neglectful, which is harmful. And you just can't casually say science is apolitical, because our own lived experiences says otherwise. Oh, even the most recent data, how, Black women have the highest mortality rate when giving birth. My neighbor across the street, she was having issues, and she was pregnant, and she got rushed to the hospital, and they had to do an early C-section. She passed away. We honored her. We, took food and everything over to the families. But yeah, and she was 36, and she just wasn't getting the support that she needed. But it's justified somehow. Medically, they were able to do it. Anyway, so I think this is an important conversation to have, especially for families who are new to homeschooling here in January. But if you grew up being told that science was dangerous or sinful or something you weren't supposed to question, or science was given to you without any acknowledging of harm that it's caused, I can see how the conversation might be confusing or unreal. And I think that's why it's important that we're intentional about the science that we use, specifically leaning towards secular sciences, not just for BIPOC families, but for everyone. And we just want to, or I guess we're making the choice to refuse to pass down a version of science that erases us or represents us or treats our communities as disposable. Secular science gives us the space to tell a truth. The truth of discoveries and the harm and ethics, context, and, all the responsibilities that come with that knowledge. It allows our kids to learn how knowledge is created and who has historically controlled it. And once you understand that science, it's just like everything else. I feel like science and religion, it's always shaped by the people in power. And it becomes clear why you can't just have neutral science. The people in power were not neutralists, right? They had an agenda. So what does that mean when we say a secular science and why it can't be neutral? Let's define what secular science is. Secular science means science that is taught by using evidence and observation, peer review, and current research, and does not include any religious doctrine. And so when something is secular, it does not mean it is anti-religion, anti-spirituality, or anti-family values. I think we are trying to rebrand what secular means, and we need to clarify it does not mean anti-religion or anti-spiritual at all, or anti-family values. No matter how much people want to push that agenda, that is not what it means. It simply means that when we're teaching biology or geology or climate science, the answers are not predetermined by theology. And you need to have that distinction because when you're looking at homeschooling curriculums, you need to look for words like neutral, worldview friendly, or balanced. Those sound like really safe words, but they're like sneaky marketing words. So you're not like, this is bad. They try to say, hey, it's okay. We meet in the middle. But neutral science isn't neutral because it usually avoids evolution. It if it does mention climate change, it's very like light. And you might see it in like a couple of sentences, maybe a paragraph, but you won't get a whole unit a lot of times on climate change. It's not going to discuss human origins. It won't usually include people of color's voices, or any indigenous knowledge that was included. It always will center white European narratives because neutral is comfortable and the truth can oftentimes be uncomfortable. So what does non-secular science look like? This is where I think we need a lot of clarification because many families don't realize what they're encountering. So a non-secular, usually Christian science includes creationism, young earth theories, gender essentialism, and moral framing of science. And they like to disguise it, especially in biology. So let me break down what that means a little bit. So when we're saying creationism doesn't always show up as like the Bible says. It usually looks like teaching that species were created separately rather than evolving from something. Or if they're talking about evolution, it's always just a theory or one perspective. Or another thing that I've seen is like fossils. When they found fossils, they'll use that as like the idea of evidence of a global flood. Yeah. And the other thing, let me look at my notes. And then it talks about like teaching variation within species, but also denying speciation. And I feel like the conclusion is decided before the evidence is ever introduced when we're looking at creationism. And that's just not how science works. And now when we're looking at young earth theories, young earth theory teaches that the earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Rather than scientifically, it's supported in suggesting that the earth is 4.5 billion years old. Right? And so when we're looking at curriculums, if they're saying that the timeline is that the Earth's history's timeline is only thousands of years old, that's a red flag. And when they're doing that, they're essentially trying to teach you that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time, while also saying that dinosaurs are a myth or a theory. And then there's also the explanation of the layers of the earth are a result of like a single flood. Right? And then it's just the overall concept, or overall avoiding the concept that deep time altogether happens. And science shouldn't be shaped to fit this belief if there's scientific evidence that shows the Earth was 4.5 billion years old. And gender essentialism is, I feel like this one's, I feel like it's catching a lot of families off guard, but it's also, especially in public schools, the conversations that people have been paying the most attention to lately. And when these districts are going back and reviewing the sciences and stuff, or what can be said and not said. I know they had a big ban in Florida and I believe Arizona. And these would violate the ban. So gender essentialism shows up when biology is used to reinforce gender roles instead of teaching like a biological diversity. So presenting sex and gender as the same thing, or teaching only two biology sexes without any nuance, right? Or framing hormones as a precursor to someone. Like boys are naturally the aggressive ones and girls are the feminine, naturally nurturing ones. Y'all, I am not the nurturing one in my house, but But those are very ancient limiting ideologies. Um, but basically using biology to justify social roles, like boys are meant to be strong, girls are weak and need help, or helpless. That's not biology. That is culture being in an agenda and a point of view, like smuggled into science. Like that's intentional and in the wrong ways. The last one is moral framing disguised as biology. This one I feel is a lot more subtle, but it's actually the most common. It's the way we talk about reproductive health, right? Or how people want you to talk about it with just using it through the lens of purity culture or abstinence language, instead of having an honest conversation about, condoms or other contraceptives that can help keep you safe. We're actually having the conversation of what happens. I know I had, heaps of friends who got their cycles and was just told, don't use a tampon because it will take away your virginity, and always use pads and don't have sex. But there was no conversation of why you shouldn't have sex. What does that mean for your body? And and so we need to have bigger conversations than purity and abstinence. Other things like how nutrition's approached. We want to talk about what communities are healthier and which ones are not. And we just want to point the finger instead of looking at, the systemic issues that are happening, the poverty, the environment, the food deserts, the access to care. And we can't just label bodies. And then when we can also look at like what was it? What is it? The DNA, like early DNA pioneers, like they try to use I think they're called geneticists, and they used to use their discoverings and tried to say that the white counterparts were more intelligent than the black counterparts, based on the data they collected, which was a very, skewed sample. Then you get into like the bell curve. So yeah, but they use science to justify their disgusting behaviors. And how does this differ from public schools, specifically in Texas? So technically, Texas public school is supposed to be secular, but it's politically restrained. Teachers are expected to teach evolution and client science, but it's very limited, and it is shaped by the school boards and parent backlash. Basically, right now, parents have a lot to say. And when we have it shaped in that way, that means we're not able to have the depth that we need or give any of the historical context or even just have conversations about ethics and power. But if you're homeschooling, it allows families to go deeper because it's your right. And I really do not think it's that most of the teachers don't care. There are some who just don't care, but I would say for the vast majority, I don't think it's that teachers don't care or don't want to teach it. The system in itself restricts them. So that's why I get frustrated with a lot of people who have all this smoke for public school teachers without understanding the systems. They got to eat too. They got to have some motion, like to feed their families and pay their bills. So you need as much smoke as you want to give these teachers, you need to give it to the system, because you do have to have a passion to teach. I didn't enjoy it. I enjoy my kids and like teaching them, but it's hard work when you're doing it in a class size, right? But you need to address the systems instead of specifically the teacher all the time. So what's secular science? What can it look like? Some really great options. I love Science Mom. And I like Math Dad, but they give you really good options to take with the videos, and they include the downloads. Oak Meadow's a really great choice, Blossom and Root. But you have to understand that curriculum by itself isn't just enough. I feel like for a full cup of secular science, you do need to have some conversations around, the indigenous ecological knowledge or environmental racism or medical ethics or climate justice, biological diversity, and just how power shapes research altogether. I don't think that this is extra, but I do believe that this will offer your kids and yourself a more complete science. So if you are new, if you pulled your kid mid-year, I don't want you to feel like you're rushed. I just wanted to give a conversation or offer a conversation about a secular science and a non-secular science. And science overall doesn't need to be heavy. It just needs to be honest. And again, I think it starts with curiosity and observation and conversation. And I like it because, again, this approach of science is something I never knew growing up. And so I'm having to do the research as I'm asking the questions. And I'm finding out new information. And I love that journey for myself. So don't ever feel like you have to know all the things. You just have to be open to learning things and have some humility. Like, it's okay. This is my first time approaching this information, or, oh, this is new information than what I was taught with. I actually think it helps humanize yourself to your kids, and they don't feel like they'll have to grow up and live up to a certain expectation because, hey, we're learning together. Mistakes happen or they don't happen. And we're all just having a really honest conversation with not only ourselves, but with each other. I want to close out this episode with you understanding it isn't about doing school right. It's about doing it with some clarity, understanding what a secular science is and what it isn't. In understanding or hearing some keywords when something is neutral and why that can fail our kids. And know that you're allowed to choose things that have evidence. And you don't have to apologize. It may just feel uncomfortable because it's maybe something different than you learned about growing up. And that's okay. And if you are here in January and you're starting fresh or unsure, or if you've been doing it and you're starting over or choosing new curriculums, I want you to take a deep breath and just tell yourself you're doing your best. You belong here. And you especially belong here at this podcast. And I want to welcome you to the Secular Homeschool Revolution. Don't forget to visit my website, secularhomeschoolrevolution.com. I've been doing good at having a new blog post up every week. Some of it is about the podcast. Some of it's just in between day-to-day things I do with my own family. But I will have on my website a science red flag download that I can't wait for you to check out because I'm new to learning on how to do downloads. Look at me learning something new. Until next time, stay revolutionary.